Somehow week 7 is in the books in fantasy football, and this is around the time where you really know if you have a good team or a bad team. Obviously, if you have a winning record or a losing record. My message here is if you think you have a team that's not so great, don't give up, because every single week we see guys that present a great buy low opportunity. And that's why in this video, we're talking about 8 players, 8 league winning trade targets that you need to get on your fantasy football team. We're talking about 4 wide receivers, 4 running backs. Make sure if you end up enjoying the video that you do like the video and subscribe to the channel. Starting at number 8, Garrett Wilson had that pretty bad drop on Sunday Night Football that led to the interception that eventually led to a touchdown. But outside of that, it wasn't a horrible day. And I know everyone was worried about Devonte Adams coming into town, but Garrett Wilson still had 5 catches for 61 yards, 9 targets, 13 fantasy points. You can't really complain about that. Yeah, it's not one of the better performances on the year for him, but he still saw a 25% target share, 100% of the routes run. Like I mentioned in a previous video, when Adams initially got traded to the Jets, I wasn't really worried about Wilson's long-term value. Yeah, he might see less targets, but it was very evident on Sunday Night Football that Adams really opens up the field, not only for Garrett Wilson, but for Breece Hall. Like, Garrett Wilson was wide open on some of his receptions, and he hasn't seen coverage like that in his career, really. So I like Adams on the roster. He makes everyone better, and Wilson is still going to see a lot of targets on this Jets offense. New offensive coordinator Todd Downing is a much more creative play caller than Nathaniel Hackett, as he's been using plenty of motions and play actions. Plus, with the Jets sitting at 2-5, and their defense hasn't looked great. Pretty questionable defense as of late. I think because of that, this Jets offense is going to continue to be pass heavy, because they're going to have to keep up with these other teams, because the defense isn't really getting it done right now. So they're going to continue to throw the football with Aaron Rodgers at a very high rate, making everyone in this passing attack, Garrett Wilson, Devonte Adams, if you want to slide Breece Hall in there, they're all going to be fantasy relevant. And this whole situation makes Wilson a great trade target, because you can still use Devonte Adams being in town. You can use it to your advantage. Oh, it was Devonte's first game. He's going to see 20 targets in week 8. Like, Garrett Wilson is going to be fine. This offense is going to have to throw a ton. And like I said, Devonte Adams is going to open up the field, leaving Garrett Wilson in a lot of really nice positions. He's going to continue to rack up fantasy points. He might even outscore Devonte Adams in fantasy the rest of the year. That's how confident I am in Wilson. So if you can get him for cheap now, coming off a not so great game, use the Devonte Adams situation to your advantage. I would be trying to get the really talented receiver on your team this week. At number 7, Devonte Smith has struggled over the last 2 weeks with AJB back into the lineup, coming off that hamstring injury. Outside of that 45-yard touchdown that Smith scored in week 6, which was on a blown coverage, he was wide open. Outside of that touchdown, Smith hasn't been great. And in week 7, he had -2 receiving yards on 2 targets, 1 catch. But let's relax here for a second and think about this. When your running back in Saquon Barkley has 175 yards on the ground in a game against the New York Giants, who can't do anything on offense, like Daniel Jones hasn't thrown a touchdown in how many weeks now, like, they didn't have to do much. It wasn't a good team. They had command of the game early, so yeah, they're going to run the ball with their Hall of Fame running back against his former team, who went crazy. Like, Saquon was going berserk from the beginning of the game, and that's what they did. They rode Barkley to another win. And while that wasn't good for Devonte Smith, yeah, A.J. Brown still got his, which he's going to every week. He's a superstar receiver on this offense. I wouldn't be panicking about Smith yet. He has double-digit fantasy points in 4 out of 5 games. And the Eagles do have some tougher matchups the next couple of games. Tougher matchups meaning games that are going to be competitive against actual NFL teams, where they're going to have to put up points. They're not going to be able to just run the football, run out the clock, which means they're going to have to throw the football more. Just look at week 7 against the Giants as a game script. Chalk it up to that, because that's basically what it was. Better days ahead. Devonte still has double-digit fantasy points in 4 out of 5 games, and he's on a really good offense that's going to need to throw more going forward. So, another perfect opportunity to get a really talented player on a really good offense on your team for cheap. And Philadelphia also has a very favorable schedule for wide receivers over the next 7 weeks. So Get Smith on your team for cheap, and it will be a steal of a trade if you can pull it off. At number 6, Chase Brown has taken over as the RB1 on Cincinnati, earning 55% of the rush attempts over his last 4 games, and he continues to see the majority of the touches over Zach Moss. And while Brown did struggle in Week 7, he was one of the guys that I told you to start, so I do apologize about that. 15 carries for 44 yards, 2.9 yards per carry, 2 receptions, 9 yards, 7.3 fantasy points, so pretty discouraging. But Chase Brown did have an impressive 30-yard run that got called back on a holding penalty, along with a touchdown that got called back in Week 6. So there's going to be bigger days for the explosive running back on a really good Cincinnati offense. And Brown has also scored double-digit fantasy points in each of his previous 3 games. He's a workhorse back. He's really talented. Like I said, on a potent Bengals offense, you want that type of player in this situation that hasn't really hit his ceiling yet because of penalties or whatever it may be. Brown is about to explode over the second half of the year is what I'm trying to tell you. Not really worried about Zach Moss. I think everyone with 2 eyes can see that Brown is the better running back at this point. Moss will be involved. He has been eating into Brown's pass down role, so if Chase can earn a little more pass down opportunities, which, let's be honest, Brown is the better receiving back, then we could be looking at a top 12, top 15 back, potentially, if everything goes right, the rest of the way. So go after the running back on Cincinnati. Buy him for cheap now before he really explodes the second half of the year. At number 5, Devon Anan. The buy low window for Anan has likely been slammed shut, with it looking like Tua is going to return in Week 8. Very thankful that Tua is going to play because I do have Anan in a lot of leagues, and he has not been the same with Tyler Huntley or whoever they're putting behind center. It's been a disaster in Miami. It's been really tough. I understand why they put Tua on IR, but even Tua came out and said he didn't have symptoms like a couple days after he suffered the concussion. So nonetheless, it looks like we're going to get Tua back. I would say the next couple of days are your last chance to acquire a premium asset for cheap. What is encouraging, though, is Devon coming off the concussion, coming off that bye week, looked solid in Week 7 until Tyler Huntley got injured, and then it was pretty much over from there. But 15 carries for 77 yards, 5.1 yards per carry, 2 receptions, 8 yards, 10.5 fantasy points. Didn't completely burn you, and that's a good yards per carry on a really bad offense. Imagine what that is going to look like when Tua returns. And we already saw what it looked like in weeks 1 and 2. Anan put up 23 fantasy points in Week 1, 29.5 fantasy points in Week 2, and that's when Tua did suffer his concussion against the Bills. One other note, this was Achan's first game back with a healthy Raheem Mostert, and Devon still saw the majority of the snaps at 57%, so it's clear that Miami wants to make Achan the RB1. He's going to get the majority of the work in this backfield, and obviously, with Tua back, it's going to open up this entire offense. Jaylen Waddle, Tyreek Hill are going to be a thing in the passing game, and they're going to have to respect Tyreek Hill and Waddle's speed, which means they're not going to be able to stack the box. Devon Anan is going to get a lot of nice running lanes with Tua back. So if you can get him for cheap, I might even be buying him high if you really need a running back, because Miami's upcoming schedule for running backs is very juicy, and we know the talent, the upside that Anan has the rest of the year. It's tremendous. So if you can get him on your team, be aggressive doing so. At number 4, Chris Alve has been a massive disappointment this year. 1 touchdown so far on the season. That's not going to cut it for a guy who's going in round 2, round 3. A lot of it has been because Derek Carr just seemed to prefer Rashid Shaheed over Alve. Rashid was looking like the wide receiver 1 on the Saints, no question about it. But with Shaheed now out for the year with that knee injury, Carr won't have a choice but to throw to Alve. Yes, Alvin Kamara will continue to be involved in the passing game, but outside of Kamara and Alve, they don't really have anyone else. And the Saints are looking like a dumpster fire right now. We don't know when Derek Carr is going to come back. I would expect Carr to probably miss 1 more game and then return. So if you're in a good position with your roster, with your record, and you can afford to wait a couple more weeks for Alve to really get going, then I would try to get him on your team, because there is some risk here, right? So use this to your advantage when you're trying to buy really low on Alve. is that he suffered his third concussion in 3 NFL career games, which isn't great. So Alve could miss week 8. That wouldn't shock me at all, which would really open up a nice buy low window. And we know Derek Carr dealing with that oblique injury, likely out, like I said, another 1 to 2 weeks would be my guess. But all things considered, if you are in a good position with your team, you just need a high upside guy to maybe put you over the top the second half of the year, then go after Alve. I think it's the perfect time to acquire him. He's probably not going to get any lower than he is right now, any cheaper than he is right now. So go get the talented receiver on your roster now for a really good price. At number 3, Marvin Harrison Jr. It's been a very up and down season for the 4th overall pick. Week 1 was an absolute disaster. Everyone was calling him a bust. Everyone was like, oh man, this wide receiver looks horrible. And then weeks 2 to 4, Marvin Harrison was like, not so fast. And he looked really good. He had 4 touchdowns over that stretch. But now, last 2 games, not counting week 6 that he missed with the concussion. So weeks 5 and 7, Marvin has combined for 5 catches for 57 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 10.7 fantasy points over that stretch. To be fair, Harrison likely had a 70-yard touchdown on Monday Night Football that Kyler just completely missed. He put on a nice double move. He was wide open, and Murray just missed him. So if they connect on that touchdown, then the narrative is much different surrounding Marvin. So that's why he's a buy low, because we still think that Marvin is going to get it going with Kyler. Kyler has also been struggling a little bit as well. So 2 things that we think will get better. Also, this coaching staff needs to do a better job of getting Marvin more involved, spreading him around the field, giving him some easy targets, putting him in motion, giving him some design plays. Like, they're not doing anything creative with him right now, which is really hurting him. Like, so if the coaching staff can give him some more layup targets, scheme him open a little bit better, that's another thing that can change. I think Kyler is going to get more comfortable. I think this coaching staff will get better. And I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is still a really nice player. He's just going through a little bit of a rough stretch right now. So you want to get talented guys on pretty good offenses on your roster if you can for cheap. And Marvin Harrison fits that mold perfectly. And if Arizona wants to win football games, they're going to have to throw the ball. And similar to Chris Olave, like, I don't think Marvin's stock is going to be any lower than it is right now. So if you can get him on your team, acquire him for very cheap, then definitely do it now. At number 2, Jaylen Warren has been hampered by injuries this year as he dealt with a hamstring injury in the preseason and then suffered a knee injury early on in the year. But now he's finally looking fully healthy and has turned this backfield into a 50-50 split with Najee Harris in week 7. Najee's looking good in his own right. He's obviously looking for a contract. So that's usually, you bet on guys who are looking to get paid. And Najee is running with a different type of anger this year. So yeah, not awesome news for Warren owners, because last year it was very clear that Jaylen was the better running back in this backfield. I still think he is the better running back in this backfield. But Najee has been showing a little bit more this year. He's had some of those nice splash plays. So I'm not totally discouraged on Jaylen. First of all, don't forget the player that Jaylen was last year when he was healthy. First in missed tackles forced per attempt, second in yards after contact per attempt, third in explosive run rate, on a run-heavy Steelers offense that doesn't have Justin Fields anymore. Fields was taking away a lot of those rush attempts, a lot of those design runs from mainly Najee at the time. But now with Warren back, we know Arthur Smith is still going to want to run the football. They're not going to be running the football with Russell Wilson. So Harris is going to benefit from this. Warren is going to benefit from this. The one thing I would cautious you guys on is, what does this backfield look like when Cordell Patterson returns from injury? It could be a messy running back by committee, which would be horrible. But I'm betting that this coaching staff has a brain and Jaylen Warren still has a prominent role on this offense going forward because he's earned it. He's the best running back on this team. I'd be buying either way. Buy low on Warren, who has incredible upside. I really want Warren on my team for the second half of the year where he usually seems to really turn it on. At number 1, Christian McCaffrey. This has been a guy that I don't want to toot my own horn, but I told you guys not to draft. Not because I thought he was going to get hurt, but because the fact that he was hurt with that calf. I didn't want to draft an older running back who had an injury history that was already hurt. On top of him leading the NFL in touches last year, the numbers don't support CMC having a good year the following year. Look at what happened to Josh Jacobs after he led the league in rushing. He's kind of looked like a different back. Not in a good way, but less on that and more about the fact that I'm recommending that you go get CMC on your team for cheap now. You probably should have done it weeks ago. I was too scared, to be honest. I didn't think that he would ever play again this year. There was a part of me that was like, he's done. Like, Achilles injuries in both legs. Like, no thank you. Don't sign me up for that, but it's looking pretty good for Christian at this point. Week 10 return is likely after the 49ers come out of their bye. 49ers are currently 3-4. If they keep losing, are they going to rush CMC back, or are they going to be like, oh man, we need to give this guy 20 to 25 touches a game immediately because we need to win football games because we're in a win now window where we have all these stud players on our team. Like, we need to win now, so we need to give McCaffrey the ball. So it could go either way. They could pack it in and not really risk CMC tearing an Achilles, and then probably not, his career could be over, or he wouldn't be very effective the following year. Or they could be like, we need him now, and they just feed him the rock. Another question you have to ask yourself is, what do the splits look like with McCaffrey and Jordan Mason? I don't think Jordan Mason just goes away. He's played way too well to just not have a role at all. He's going to have a role. But all that being said, if you're 5-2, 7-0, 6-1, 4-3, if you have a winning record and you're feeling really good about your team, this is a long-term play here. Like, if you can wait a couple weeks for CMC to get going, he might not get going until close to the fantasy playoffs. Like, you would be eyeing CMC to maybe take you to the championship and win the whole thing. This isn't like a guy who's going to fix your problems right now. So if you are in a good situation and you can get McCaffrey for a relatively cheap price, it offers some risk, but the reward is massive as well. If CMC comes back and looks like 80% of the player that he was last year, then he could be a league winner the last 5 weeks, 6 weeks of the year. So there is risk here, but again, test out the waters. Like, maybe the McCaffrey owner in your league won't trade him at this point. Like, if he's waited this long, he probably just is going to wait for CMC to come back, but maybe he has 1-2 wins on the year and needs to win now. He can't wait for CMC to be effective down the stretch. So use that to your advantage. Try to get McCaffrey on your team for cheap. Don't give away a stud to get CMC. Remember, this is a buy low video. So if you can get the superstar running back for a really fair price, then I would absolutely do that. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you took away anything from the video, if you got any value from the video, I'd really appreciate if you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you on the next one.